All right. Well, we'll be getting started here in just a little bit. Welcome everybody as you're joining. If you would please check in the chat box. We'd love to know where you're coming to us from. And it is sunny here today. It was a little chilly this morning, but happy to see the sun.
Wait until summer and my office will be like 80 degrees by 9 o'clock because I get
Oh,
this direct sun right in the morning. It warms up
yeah,
this
warms up
area.
quickly.
Yep.
Well, I'm just going to do a super informal introduction of Caitlin, and I'll let her introduce herself more formally. But welcome everybody to our NCRAN Friday, monthly Friday presentations. And this month, U of I, University of Illinois Extension is hosting this month's session, and I am happy to present Caitlin Mellendorf, one of our nutrition and wellness educators. And she has kindly agreed to present on one of her topics that she presents on regularly. And I'm just going to pass it to her. She can tell a little bit more about herself. And then our topic of this month is 5 flavors, how the palate changes with age. So thank you, Caitlin, for agreeing to speak for NCRAN this month. It is always a pleasure to hear you talk. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Chelsea. So as Chelsea mentioned, both of us actually are part of University of Illinois Extension Family and Consumer Science teams, and my area is nutrition and wellness. So I cover 3 counties in the central part of Illinois, and we do programming statewide around diabetes, heart health, food safety, food preservation, so canning, freezing, dehydration. And we're just starting to get into a little bit more education on fermentation. And then in a non-COVID world, I like doing our hands-on cooking classes. Those are really fun to see those light bulb moments when people are working in groups together and getting to learn cooking skills from each other, as well as what I'm presenting on. And so one of the areas that we work with are older adults. And so we have quite a bit of curriculum written for those groups because they are dealing with some unique uh, challenges and creating some successes for them with themselves as they're aging is a big part of what we do with those lessons. So this one, the 5 flavors lesson, I dubbed it "What's Your Palate?" And so today we're going to talk about our 5 senses, our 5 tastes, and look at how that combines into the perceptions and experiences we have around food, and then transition into a little bit more about what it is with aging that is going to need some additional tips and tricks to try and create that positive eating environment. So just to do a quick little overview, we are a flagship of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which I saw there's several other extensions on here as well. So you are in very similar situations to us, where we're providing outreach education to our communities around the state, not necessarily just for university students, but for our kids through older adult audiences instead. And so today I want to cover our 5 senses, 5 tastes, and talk about a few examples around some psychology of taste. There's some really interesting studies. There's way more than I could ever cover in an hour, so I'll just pick a few that I think are interesting. I'll also talk about how the palate changes with aging and explore some options for if a older adult that you're working with is struggling with one of their senses and not able to enjoy foods very much. We'll talk about some options that are worth trying out. Ooh, too fast. So I think a lot of us are pretty familiar with these 5 senses, being able to see, being able to touch things, being able to hear, taste things, smell things, and all of those 5 senses work together to create our perception of the world, how we see things. So if you're working with someone who is colorblind, some variation of colorblind, that's going to change their experience to the outside world. If someone has difficulty hearing, that changes their perception to the outside world. Especially right now with COVID, a lot of people are newly experiencing loss of taste or smell, and that changes how they're experiencing the world. So of our senses, each of those are creating sensations in the body that are transmitted as nerve signals to the brain and allowing that perception of our outside world. So if I use the example of apple pie, you might notice smells coming in through the nose. So you may notice the senses of the flavors and smelling compounds from apples, maybe some of those smelling compounds from cinnamon. As I'm eating, I might notice there's a crunch. I might feel my jaw and my teeth and the sensations as I crunch through that crust. My tongue's taste receptors may be noticing the fat compounds from the butter, maybe noticing the sugar molecules from the sweeteners that are added to the pie. I may be seeing that triangular shape of the pie, the little bit of curve where the pie crust met the very edge of the pie pan. I might notice the weight of the plate with the piece of pie on it, the weight of the fork, or the coolness of the metal. There's a lot of sensations in that. And so for a lot of people, all of those sensations signal positively to the brain. And we might go, this is an enjoyable experience. I like this pie. I'm sorry for apple pie lovers. I can't join you. It's not my favorite pie of choice. I jumped too far. PowerPoint has been weird on my computer the last month, so I apologize if I'm jumping. Yep, it did jump. Okay. So we have those 5 senses that we just talked about, being able to smell, to taste, to hear, to see, and to touch. We also have 5 tastes that primarily come through in our mouth. So we have sweet flavors. So we're getting small sugar molecules like glucose. We're also getting larger molecules like lactose, which is a pretty non-sweet sugar that we find in milk. We're getting sour flavors to the mouth. So citrus is a great example. Vinegar is another great example. Salty compounds, of course, things like salt added to foods. We can get surface salt. So if you're eating potato chips, you might have that sensation of touch with the salt crystals on your fingers. So table salt is what we usually think of for saltiness. There are some non-sodium salts that you can buy. Usually they have potassium as that substitute. It's still a crystalline salt, but it's still a salty flavor, just a little bit different than table salt with sodium. We can get bitter compounds, so coffee, chocolate, tea. Some vegetables can have some bitter compounds to them. And then umami is that last of our 5 tastes. So it's not a new taste by any means. This is something that we've been talking about since I was in college. And it's this sensation and taste of the amino acids in foods, so the proteins in foods. And it gives you a very savory, earthy taste. So mushrooms are a great example. And then a lot of red meat gives you that umami flavor. Soy sauce fits into that if you think about very kind of earthy, savory tones. So when we have our senses and we have the tastes, these combine to create the flavors that we experience. And there is a term called retronasal olfaction. And I had to print out the definition so I could read it because I wasn't gonna get it correct. But it is this, it's different from smelling foods. If I put food out in front of me and I'm smelling the vapors that are coming off of it, this is different than retronasal olfaction. So this is the sensation from inside the mouth and taste receptors connecting with our nose, signaling to the brain and creating that flavor. And so I like this example with garlic salt. So this is a example I had from like 9th or 10th grade chemistry, my 9th or 10th grade chemistry teacher. And I thought it was so unique, and it's something that I've remembered over the years. So what he did was he gave us a little bit of garlic salt on our hand or on a plate or in a cup, I forget. And he said, I want you to dip your finger in it, and you're going to plug your nose, stick your tongue out, and start first by putting that little bit of garlic salt on your tongue with your nose still plugged, and wait a few seconds. And what are you most likely to notice is going to be a taste. So we have those 5 tastes. So salty is probably the taste that you're going to recognize. And then he said, unplug your nose and take a big breath in. And what you're getting in that smell is then garlic. So you're not noticing the salt really anymore. What you're smelling, what you're sensing is the garlic. And so there was a literature review back in 2020, so not too long ago, that looked at volatile compounds, so volatile meaning that they can rise into the air. And the research identified from the literature review 85 sulfur compounds in garlic and 40 non-sulfur compounds. So if you think about, we have 5 senses that can connect to taste bud receptors on our tongue, but there were more than 100 different volatile compounds in garlic that we can sense with our nose. We're getting major influence from the smells that are given off by foods. So taste is just one piece, but it's a whole experience, particularly when we involve the nose. So let's shift now to some of the psychology around taste and how we experience foods. So this study, in 2012, some researchers in Europe put a strawberry-based dessert on a white plate and a black plate and presented it to the group. They ate the dessert and were asked to rate different categories from that dessert. And those, oh, actually, we're on a Zoom call. I can do a poll. Which one? So there were 3 factors that I pulled from the research to share. Let's do a poll. Let's see. What do you think? Black or white plate? Which one was perceived as sweeter, the black plate or the white plate? Tell me in chat. Okay, so I'm seeing a mix. I see lots of white plates, a couple blacks. The white plate was perceived as sweeter. Which plate, the black plate or the white plate, was perceived as more flavorful? Tell me in chat, what do you think? Okay, I'm seeing a mix again. This time I'm seeing more black answers. Okay, the white plate was still considered more flavorful for this dessert. And then I'll share the last little bit here. The last question they asked was whether they just liked the dessert. And more people rated liking the dessert when it was placed on the white plate. And I know that these pictures on the slide are not the exact dessert, but it was the only pictures I could find that had strawberries in them on white plates and black plates. And it's kind of unique. So also the backgrounds of these photos, you notice, are lighter in color on the white plate, kind of a grayish tone on the black plate. So that can also influence how we perceive and might consider a food tastier or not as tasty. Anybody remember purple and green ketchup? So I don't even know how old I would have been, but I'm guessing this would have been in the mid 90s, maybe late 90s when we had purple and green ketchup. And there is some psychology and some research around perceptions of food attraction or disgust. And so ketchup, I think, is a nice example because at least in a lot of places, ketchup is red. We're using red tomatoes. We're creating this vinegary, sweet kind of sauce that goes well on a lot of foods. And when we change the color of it, the increase in disgust for that off color tends to increase. And so this is one reason why that food kind of fell out of the market. We don't see that really as an option. If anyone still sees purple or green ketchup, let me know. I want to know if it still exists. We see this for also colors in terms of like fruits and vegetables. So if a food like a lettuce is not the same bright green that someone might expect, they can kind of come into that disgust sensation and go, yeah, that doesn't look like what I think it looks like. And this is biologically beneficial. So if foods look off from their typical colors, that might signal that the food is starting to decompose. It might have bacteria or other organisms that could make us sick. And so it does serve some purpose for safety.
Caitlin?
Yeah.
Is that the same as like I've seen albino asparagus, with the white asparagus. I think that's the carrots as well. And I wonder about nutrition wise. We always tell our participants, the darker green is more healthy, it has more vitamins and all of that. And then they come out with white asparagus. I was just wondering, does that affect our ability with our palate and our taste buds, and whether or not we purchase things like that or not either?
And that times in perfectly to this next slide. So in many, iterations of breeding of carrots, in this example, carrots have typically been purple shades, and we have bred them to be more orange in color. And some of this is related to this attraction or disgust concept. And purple carrots, if you've ever had a purple carrot, they taste the same. There really is no difference. I know there's some pictures, and you can kind of see in this picture, there's a bright yellow, kind of a pale yellow carrot as well. So there's a lot of variety in color for foods. Same as Betty mentioned with the asparagus, you can find purple asparagus, green asparagus, white asparagus. You can find cauliflower that is orange. We've got some really fun, unique foods that are being grown. But how does that impact our perception of that food? And is it attractive to us, or does it kind of invoke disgust in us? And I didn't look specifically into that section of the research, but I'm sure there is some to talk about nutrition and what is acceptable. Now, I will say that from a cooking standpoint, the carotenoids that give carrots their orange color are very heat stable. So if I make beef stew and I've got carrots and potatoes and beef and onions, the carrots retain their bright orange color for a long time with cooking. The purple carrot, that anthocyanin pigment that makes purple or blue, is not particularly heat stable. And so it starts to leach out of the food, or it can get kind of a brownish color. And so it can create that disgust color. So if I make stew or beef stew with purple carrots, I'm getting kind of this bleached out light purple color, and it kind of invokes that disgust color as well. It gives this illusion of something is off in the food. Now, eating them raw can be really fun and exciting, but the cooking piece of that can be just give kind of that discomfort of like, what am I eating? There's also some genetic addition to the psychology of taste. And primarily we talk about this in vegetables. So I mentioned earlier of our five tastes, bitter is one of them. And a lot of vegetables, which have different vitamins, different minerals, are great sources of fiber, which are beneficial for gut health, for managing heart disease. They're foods that for some people, that bitter flavor is just overwhelming, and they're genetically sensing more bitter in that food than non-bitter tasters. And so for me, I love broccoli. My husband could care less. And I've never asked him if it's because he thinks it's bitter, if there's something off about it. But for some people, we also have this predisposition to not enjoying bitter foods because it has such an intense flavor for us. And so there is some research to say that, yes, people do avoid bitter foods, even if they are also providing important nutrients. So going into the senses around aging, I think a lot of us that work with older adults, we know this is a normal part of aging, is the reduction in senses and being able to sense things. So there's a study in 2016 that looked at over 3,000 adults between the ages of 57 and 85, and all of them to some extent had impaired, one of the 5 senses was impaired. Primarily the sense of taste got lost more, as well as the sense of touch dropped more. Smell, sight, and hearing were not as low in this particular group, but more than half of them had what was considered a significant deficiency in at least one sense. And again, I don't think this is not news to anybody on this call. I'm sure this is something you're probably familiar with. So one research study that I thought was interesting, again, another literature review looking at 3 things: taste threshold, food preferences, and then actual food choices. So with taste threshold, what that's looking at was, if I give an older adult a taste, what is the amount of flavoring I need to give that individual so that they can sense it? And in this particular literature review, all the research that they looked at did say the threshold was higher for older adults, meaning that they needed more of the molecules for salt, salty, sweet, or different flavors to register that sensation or that taste was on their tongue. But they did note that there is, as we talked about, there is genetic variability with that. There can be other factors that can influence that threshold level for taste. They also looked at food preferences. So there is a concept, and one that this research said, we're not quite sure if this is the case. So one concern is that if an older adult has difficulty sensing a flavor or a taste, they may add more sugar to their coffee. They may add more salt to their vegetables, or they may prefer sweeter foods. And so that looks at the food preferences and the food tastes. And for the most part, the literature is still kind of all over the place. We haven't really shown for sure that a loss of a sense or a reduction in a sense really changed whether our older adults preferred sweeter things or saltier things, or chose salty things, more sweet things, which is kind of good news from us as nutrition educators, that we can still encourage healthier choices. And at least from the research, we wouldn't be able to say for sure that if I tell this person to eat less salty things, they're going to ignore me and still eat that salty food because that's their preference. We don't have that literature evidence right now. And of course, with food choices are not just about enjoying the food, it's also cost, ability to prepare the food, lots of things in addition to that. So beyond your loss of senses or reduction in senses just from normal aging, there are some additional factors that of course are going to change whether you're able to sense something as strongly or not. So some medications can impair senses. So you may want to advise any clients you're working with to see if there's a medication switch that someone can make. If they're noticing like foods just don't taste right on this medication, advise them to talk with their provider and see if they could try a similar medication that may not have that side effect. Smoking is one as well that definitely impairs sense of smell and taste in particular. Some health conditions, so if you have gum disease, certainly if you have tooth loss, if you have inflammation in the mouth, that can change your experience to touch. Maybe just really uncomfortable to have foods in the mouth if there's a lot of inflammation going on. There's some research that multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's are health conditions where we see some of these loss of senses as part of the disease process. And then more newly, we're seeing COVID-19 side effects being loss of taste and smell. So some of these are temporary. So if we are able to change medication, that's great. We may be able to restore that sense or that loss of sense or that reduction in sense. But unfortunately, some of these may be long-term. So if you have advanced gum disease, it's probably hard to reverse that at that point. For some people that we're seeing with, what's being dubbed as long COVID, we don't know right now if some of those side effects are going to be permanent for that person or if it's something that we can restore over time. Smoking, generally for people that stop smoking, they regain stronger sense of taste, stronger sense of smell. So it's a good thing if that is the case, that it can be temporary. We can restore those senses to their stronger abilities, particularly if we're already seeing losses of senses or reduction in senses from normal aging. Let's try not to compound it with other factors. So if we are looking to advise a client to go seek treatment, if they did have a reduction in sense or they've lost a sense, we can recommend that they go to an otolaryngologist or a ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. They would be the one to assess, what is this loss of hearing about? What is this loss of taste possibly about? Because we as educators, that's not our goal, but we can advise our older adults and our clients in classes to seek additional help if they need it. There is an interesting clinical trial going on right now, particularly because of loss of sense and taste and smell for those who have had COVID. And one of those trials is having them sniff essential oils. And there's other medications and treatments being tried as part of this trial, but the essential oil is one of them. So having them regularly regularly sniff essential oils, even if they can't smell it. The goal is to see if maybe trying to retrain the brain to recognize some of these senses, these smells that are coming from the essential oils. I'm curious if anyone has heard about this, or I did not look before today to see if there was any early research that's been put out yet, but curious if anyone has heard about this or has anything to add.
I don't, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what they find out on some of this stuff after they've done some of this research on smell.
Yeah, so for those that are not familiar, the term in the graphic here, anosmia, is loss of smell.
I also think it's interesting when they talk about when the people have the smell of like burnt toast, or the smell of like terrible smells, like, things that are disgusting. So that's interesting also.
Yeah. So generally, a lot of the recommendations for improving senses is directed for cancer patients, because radiation and chemotherapy definitely impact our senses. So I'll use my mom as an example, for her going under chemotherapy and radiation for breast cancer, she had major change to taste. So some particular medications, some of the chemo gives people a metallic taste in their mouth. And we don't really have a lot of other recommendations for non-cancer patients in terms of what might help someone who is lost or had a reduction in whatever sense they may have. And this includes for older adults. So we don't have a lot of research right now on what it is that we can do, particularly for our older adult populations, to encourage and try and, restore the sense of, not necessarily restore the sense of smell. We'll wait for the clinical trial on that one, but to maybe enhance the smells that they already have, or try and give them a more pleasurable experience if there's a sense that they just can't seem to get to work. So one of those is cooking with herbs and spices. So I love this as a recommendation for trying new cultural foods. So excuse me, Cajun food has a lot of really nice spices in it, as does Indian food. A lot of European Mediterranean foods have some really great flavors to them. And then adding in acidic ingredients. So making citrus a part of maybe water. So adding in, I have some ice cube trays that have lemon juice in them, and I will throw that in my water and sip that. And I find, for me, it's actually kind of nice. It kind of lubricates my throat. But we can have that kind of sourness to foods, and that can really make drinking water, for example, more enjoyable. Vinegars, there's a whole variety of flavors in vinegar. You can get red wine vinegar, which has a kind of a sweet tone to it, as does balsamic. You can get garlic flavored vinegars or onion flavored vinegars to really amp up those stronger flavors. Onion and garlic, if they can tolerate it, is great flavor to food. Share in comments if you've got any particular flavors that you are just like, yes, this is something I'm enjoying lately. And while the research doesn't show that this reduction in scents really encourages seniors to add a ton of sugar or a ton of salt to their food, it does in some studies, but not consistently. But we can still recommend that our seniors still try to cook and prepare foods with minimal salt and sugar, and use the herbs, the spices, the acidic ingredients to enhance those flavors. We could have a whole separate conversation about the fact that older adults generally need fewer calories as they age. They're not as physically active. And so we really want to maximize the vitamins and the minerals, the other nutrients that they're getting, and not overdoing the low nutrient foods that particularly tend to be high in sugar and high in salt. I'm seeing it in chat. Nola has done sliced cucumbers or vegetables or fresh herbs and water. Yeah, I know I'm sure Chelsea can speak to this because we've done many meetings on campus. The I Hotel always seems to have the water stations that are set up with slices of lemon or orange, or I've seen strawberries in their water a time or two. So anything that can add some flavor to what you've already got. Mint is also a great one for sweeter flavors. I have it's a cinnamon tea that I leave in my hot water for a really long time. I don't let it sit for 5 minutes. I might let it sit for like an hour because I really like that strong cinnamon flavor that you can get from this tea, that it doesn't diffuse fast enough to get a nice strong flavor for me at like 5 minutes. So I may let it go for quite a while. And there is really nice research showing that our bodies do adapt. So there's some newer research, particularly for individuals that are following a ketogenic diet, or known as keto, that because they're primarily doing a lot of vegetables and animal protein, they're not doing a lot of fruit, that their perception of sweet is, or their, not their perception, their interest in sweet things is lower. They don't have that desire for a sweet of things. We see the same thing for salt, that our tongues do adapt over time to less salty food. And our threshold is able then to increase because, or I guess decrease, because we don't need as much salt to create the correct, I'm going to use that in quotes, the correct flavor for us to register. Oh, that's enjoyably salty. It's not too salty. It's not undersalted. It's at that right flavor. So, encourage your older adults that it does take time, and their bodies and their tongues and their senses do adjust, particularly for salt and sugar. And it will get easier over time if they're able to stick with that reduction in salt and sugar. We can also try to manage these senses being either lost or reduced by focusing on the working senses. So if someone is having trouble smelling, but all of their other senses are working, they're still able to see well, they can hear well, they have a nice sense of touch, their taste buds are working. So we can focus on creating visually interesting. We can serve foods with lots of color to them to engage our eyes, that sense of vision. We can utilize crunchy things to engage that sense of hearing. So carrots, celery, cabbage, or like raw coleslaw, you create that nice crunchiness to a food. It can engage your hearing. You can do foods that require hand usage. So maybe you're having a sandwich that you're eating just with your hands and you're able to sense that with your fingers, and then creating nice flavors for your palate to enjoy. Those can help when you're lacking one of those other senses. And if there's multiple senses that are being lost or reduced, we just kind of keep trying to see which combinations are going to create an enjoyable eating environment, which goes on to part number 2, that second bullet point. If we have seniors that are in long-term care and they are able to dine with other residents in the facility, that can help essentially create distraction. So our seniors are able to eat, even if they're maybe having difficulty hearing, but they can still see well, they can, still taste well, but they're getting the environment and the busyness of other people talking and smiling or laughing. And so they may be able to kind of distract themselves from the fact that they may not hear as well, but they can still visually see people enjoying themselves. They can taste the food and get that enjoyment. That can be the same for individuals that are staying at home by themselves or with another person, to set up candles at the dining area, setting up music if they have good hearings, having nice music in the background, or if they really like watching the news while they eat, having that interaction to create an enjoyable environment, even if maybe their sense of taste is not as strong, but their hearing is still really good, their sense of smell is really good. Having that candle going, having the radio on or music or local news can create a more enjoyable environment for that person. And lastly, just trying to visualize a memory. So if they are lacking a sense of taste, but previously did have that sense of taste, they may be able to visualize that memory. Of course, it won't be exactly the same, but it can create and activate other parts of the brain. And I'm sure Chelsea can speak better to this on brain work, but being able to visualize, okay, I'm having chocolate cake. I can't taste it or smell it very well, but I'm going to think about a time when I could taste and smell this chocolate cake and remember some of the other things about it that were enjoyable. Maybe there was a birthday party memory that's associated with this chocolate cake, or dining with another friend and having cake and having a fun discussion. Having that visualization can go a long way to helping enhance that eating experience, because that is something that we do see a lot with older adults, is the interest in eating can go down over time. And there's a whole host of factors as to, what might put that individual at risk for just not eating as much and not having that interest. And we do want to encourage our seniors to be eating well, because we do see increases in some nutrient needs over the age of 50, and then again over the age of 70. And we're trying to encourage them to remain as healthy as they can over the long term. So with that lesson was a little bit shorter. I know there were, it's always, I think things for me go a little faster when I'm doing webinars because I'm not stopping to engage with questions. So with that, we are done a little bit early with my presentation, but if you have thoughts or questions or things that you want to share, please do so. I think this is a small enough group. I think we should be okay if someone wants to turn on the microphone and share, or feel free to type in the chat.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Caitlin? Go ahead and put those in the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask her. In the meantime, I am going to pop a link into the chat box for a evaluation for NCRAN. If you would so kindly answer or fill that out, we would appreciate it. And it looks like Nola has a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks, Caitlin. This has been very interesting. I was wondering two things. So I often hear that you have to train your taste buds to like something. So how many times, and I'm sorry if you mentioned it, and I had a phone call come in during this webinar, how many times, how long does it take to train your taste buds to like something? And then how often do our taste buds change?
Okay. So to the first question, how many times do you need to try something? It is entirely possible that you will eat something forever and still never like it. So just have that awareness that that is totally possible. I will use myself as an example. Plums. I can't get on with plums. I've tried, different varieties. I've tried different ripeness levels. I just don't care for them. So it is entirely possible that you will try something forever and still not like it. But in general, we do this a lot for youth audiences to try and encourage parents to still offer foods and try that around. So generally it's in that 10 to 20 times trying something. And I do encourage trying it in different formats. So for example, you may not like raw mushrooms on a salad, but you may like them sauteed in oil or mixed into pasta. So sometimes it is the format that really matters a lot. Raw broccoli, I love broccoli. I hate raw broccoli. So sometimes it's also the texture that's in there. So along with trying to try a food multiple times to really develop the taste of it and hopefully the enjoyment of it, also consider how it was prepared. So there are a lot of different ways that we can prepare foods. And so if one route of preparation is just not enjoyable for you, try it a different way and then try it, 10 more times, whether it's that same way until you find something that you enjoy, or keep switching up how you are preparing that food and maybe something will pop up. So generally in that 10 to 20 range, people will start to have their taste buds adjust, and they will have, sometimes it's just familiarity at that point. Is you are familiar with that food, your body is familiar with that food, and it goes, okay, this is enjoyable, I'll take this. To your second question, and feel free to interrupt me and correct me if I didn't remember the full length of the question, was about loss of taste buds. And I am struggling to remember the last thing that I read about this, but we do see that taste buds do essentially atrophy. So they, stop working over time. And I want to say that it is usually over the age of 70 when that starts to happen. I will need to go do some extra reading to remember that one correctly.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. And I'll, so also too, I was wondering, so do our taste buds change over time? Like, so like maybe as a teenager, you like, you really like something, and then as you become older, middle age, you're like, and the same thing, you're like, oh, I don't like that so much.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a lot of research on that, but there's definitely a lot of anecdotal things to say that that sometimes it's just simply a matter of living long enough that we experience new foods, we get influenced by other people. So especially as teenagers and as kids, we're very heavily influenced by what our peers are doing. And so we may try foods that we wouldn't otherwise try because a friend or a family member ate that. I know I didn't eat salad dressing for the longest time, even though it was offered to me by adults. But I sat and had pizza with some friends that were my age who put dressing on their salad. And I'm like, okay, I'll try that now. So we do see some of that shift in not peer pressure, but just experience and seeing what other people do and being open to trying things with different types of foods and what other people are eating. And just our interest in food can change. So if I think, we talk about sushi, probably several decades ago, that was kind of a bizarre, eccentric kind of food. And now it's very modern, it's very popular. And a lot of people thinking of eating raw fish is kind of like, oh, why would I do that? But we see it more commonly now.
This is Debbie Matthews. I'm wondering what the trends are in terms of assisted living and menu patterns for those assisted living facilities. We're having more of them. And I just wondered if, we're having any impact as far as this research goes on menu planning and food choices at these facilities.
I will struggle to answer this one because I don't have a lot of experience with menu planning for long-term care. I've done more with K through 12 meal planning, so I have a little bit more experience there. So at least from a K through 12 perspective, yes, we are seeing requests, particularly for our middle school and high schoolers. They're requesting more variety of things. The couple of times I have assisted here in town, we have not a facility, a organization that does congregate and home delivered meals. So similar to Meals on Wheels, so there's other programs. This is a local one in one of my counties. And they have asked me to advise on their menus. So they, at least for the state of Illinois in this particular organization, they're required to have a dietitian review their menu and just make sure it's meeting standards. And they are, at least at this time, from, again, just this one facility, they are not seeing a ton of changes in palate. At least at this point, they still get requests for fried chicken. They still get requests for liver and onions. So I think at this point, the generation is still enjoying some of the foods that they grew up with. Now, almost on a counterpoint, though, is that we did see requests for more, I'm going to quote the, quote unquote, exotic food. So they're requesting more Mexican food. So lots of, and more, Americanized Mexican foods. So taco salads, fajitas. So I think, yes, we will see that change over time, but I don't have enough experience with long-term care menu planning to give you a good answer.
As a boomer, I'm very concerned about this because I'm a boomer.
Sure.
I'm on the early edge of the boomers. But I've watched my mom, who has Alzheimer's, have a change in her preference for food. This is a woman who never liked Mexican food or Chinese food, and now that's all she wants. Yeah, so that has been quite fascinating to me. That
and Chelsea, can I pull you in? I hate to put you on the spot, but can you speak to this a little bit more? I know you have more background experience with Alzheimer's research.
So, and I was going to say there definitely needs to be a lot more work done in this area, and I think, but they do have what I was going to add is the plate choices was interesting that you shared, Caitlin, the research on what the plate choices shows, because there is also a lot of things done with having color, having a differentiation between the color of the plate and the food and the color of the plate and like the table for individuals with Alzheimer's so they can see it. And so in long-term care, when they're looking, or assisted living, when they're looking at trying to help individuals see what they're eating and make it more appetizing, they've done a lot of research for identifying what's on the plate or make it more appetizing for them, because sometimes people lose interest in eating as they go through the disease process. And so, they also kind of, that visual field starts to change as they go through the disease process. And so they have done research on looking at plate colors, looking at, what looks, having some kind of contrast in color versus the plate and like the table. So if the table is like kind of a light brown and the plate is white, like it's all blending in, or, different things like that. And so there is research out there on those kind of things. So when you're talking about, well, people were enjoying their food more on white plates, that was very interesting to me. So, because I haven't read that side of the research, so that was quite interesting. But as far as change of palate, my guess, Debbie, and this is just purely guess, I do not know research on this, is that has she been exposed to those foods earlier in life, or was it more like, I can imagine my mom saying, oh no, I wouldn't eat that, that's too spicy. Like that's what my mom would say right now is, and if, people's taste buds are dulling or those kind of things, they might be more acceptable. They actually are getting the flavor, so they're enjoying it more because there might be more flavors, or my guess is they're more Americanized, so they aren't very spicy, but it does have a lot of flavors in it if it's the beans and corn and rice, and it's got a lot of flavor in it, so they actually are having more flavor to it than just maybe like mashed potatoes. It's a solid flavor versus like lots of flavor mixed together. They might have more taste to it for them
Sure.
as they're aging. It's a guess. It's a guess. So
She was a meat and potatoes chick.
absolutely, as most of our parents probably were. I mean, our grandparents, and so thinking about. Yeah. And so I'm thinking,
And
I always,
I'm a foodie. I like things fresh and seasonal. And,
mhm.
I think I'm going to gag if you put me in an assisted living place and I've got fried chicken and that the liver. I'll starve. I will starve. I will eat my 70% dark chocolate and drink champagne.
And so, what I'll say to that is they are being more person-centered. And so it's good to make choices now, like when, I scope out places that are making the choices based on what people want, and have very active councils for the people who have resident directed, and they are directing those food choices, because a lot of places are more gearing their menus based on residents, and they're letting people choose. So some people are kind of making that turn to that person-centered and letting things be more guided, and some are more still top down, I would say. So it kind of just depends on the systems and the locations and those kind of things. So we have a long way to come, but I think that the people are going to speak, Debbie. So I think there will be an uprising if, they're going more to single rooms instead of 2 and 4 people in room. I mean, we've come a long way. And so I think there will still be a lot of culture change in homes as we move forward, because that's what people are going to demand. So.
Yeah, and I know a lot of more of the kind of apartment style even is doing some education with those folks that are by themselves in apartments, and some places they invite them to come into like the main building and have dinner, but then they also get the experience of cooking for themselves if that's what they feel like that day. So I think, yes, I think that person-centered approach is definitely more common now.
What's interesting about it, this is just totally on the side, is I used to work for the Alzheimer's Association in St. Louis, and we did consultations and help people try to kind of move into the person-centered when it was first starting. And this was like 14 some years ago. But some places were just doing the switch over and they didn't ask people what they wanted. And some of the residents balked at it because then they actually had to get up and go to buffets and choose their food. And they didn't want that. They wanted to be waited on. And so as much as like people were making all these changes, thinking that they were doing what was best for the people they were serving, the people they were serving were like, oh, I have to go get my food now. Like, I'm paying you all this money. Like, you're supposed to be waiting on me. And so it was very interesting to see how anytime you make any kind of change, you should always ask the people first and find out what they want, because they spent all these money on these hot buffets and all this to change all their serving styles to try to be in with what was coming. But the residents were like, oh, we don't want that. We want to be waited on. Like, but then they sort of had to ask them, like, what do you want? And then make it more restaurant style. Like, here are your 2 options, and giving them options still to make it more person-centered. It was just interesting, right? So like they were trying to do these things and be cutting edge, and at the time, and all these things, and people were balking at it because they're like, I'm paying you all this money, I want to be waited on. So
and I will say that my little bit of time working in a hospital as a dietitian to be, that I mean, some of them are switching to the more of a restaurant style, and it's not quite, obviously, because it's a hospital, but being able to give a patient a menu and saying, you order at the time that you want to eat, and we will get it to you within, usually 30 minutes, rather than your tray of food is here, whether or not you have to go do a procedure, or you're fasting,
physical therapy or what,
yes. So rather than your food sitting cold, they're switching to this more restaurant style where you order the food at the time you want, or you can have a family member or a friend in the hospital room with you do that ordering for you, so that the food is just fresher. And that was one thing that I did as an intern. I did a quality assessment study, so I followed trays up to the floors of the patient rooms, and I sat there and I took temperatures. And a lot of, at least before that hospital, I know they switched to restaurant style after I left, but at the time, the nurses were responsible for taking the trays from, admittedly, they were in metal push carts that were closed, so they were insulated a little bit, but those nurses are so busy. And so sometimes it took a while for the nurses to get a break so they could take food to patient rooms. And by that time, usually the food was pretty lukewarm. So that impacts your experience of eating as well. So it's, yes, I think from a residential perspective or a hospital perspective, I think there is a better understanding of customer requests, and how do we get foods to customers in a way that they still want to enjoy it. Because otherwise, I mean, hospital food has a terrible rap, as does K through 12 food. And again, I've not been in long-term care as an employee, but I'm assuming that, yeah, it has terrible reputation. So the more that we can switch it up, and I think having, I mean, I don't know, Chelsea, would it be important for someone to make a list of like, these are the foods that my mom likes going into long-term care?
And they do try to, a lot of times they do try to, that is an intake for the dietitian who does an intake form. So that is all part of it, but it's, everywhere's different, and they can only do so much when they're trying to, depending on how big the facility is and those kind of things.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, we did have a request, Caitlin, if you could show the slide about the 2016 study about decrease in census, if you could flip back to that slide. We had a participant ask about that real quick. And again, I'm just going to bring your attention to the evaluation. I put a link into the chat box, and today's title was 5 flavors, how the palate changes. You can just put 5 flavors. We'll know what it is when you're filling out that survey. We'd appreciate it. And then any other suggestions to fill in, you can throw in suggestions for future topics. We would appreciate that as well. And we hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you, Caitlin, on behalf of U of I Extension as well as NCRAN. We appreciate everybody joining us today. And we have another question, it looks like from Vicki.
Okay, hi, I was just about to lower my hand. I thought I missed out. Anyways, my question is, we tell children that they regrow their taste buds every 2 weeks. Is this true?
I don't know if it's every 2 weeks, but they do replenish themselves. And certainly we've all had that experience where we've accidentally, put food that was too hot on our tongue, and we felt that kind of burn, and then our tongue hurts for a couple of days. So our taste buds do regrow. I don't know if it's every 2 weeks. I haven't read up on that recently. I can't remember, but they do regrow. And that is part of, I mean, that's normal aging, is, organ function just isn't as top tier as it was when that person was in their 30s or 40s. So same for your taste buds, they do start to atrophy over time. I will have to do some reading to see if I can find how frequently taste buds tend to regenerate, but they do over time, yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, so there's a question in chat that looks like, Nola, you ate with your father just to see how the food was. Did you think that his facility food was pretty decent? Oh, I see you did answer that in chat. Need to
Yeah,
keep
and
reading.
it depends on the meal. Sometimes it was like, but oftentimes it was good. And so I highly recommend that. And spend as much time as you can there. Especially when they open back up. They're gonna need it.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have some compassion for folks working in quantity food service, because it's hard to make certain foods in small batches because you have to buy large quantities of food to serve, 50, 100, 500, 1,000 people. And so having like pasta all the time might be delicious, but if it sits on the warmer, that pasta is going to turn soft and kind of rubbery, and it's just not going to hold up. So some foods on a menu are designed so that they can hold up to heating for a long time. So I always encourage people, have some compassion for menus in long-term care or K through 12 food service. There really are just some foods that don't hold up well, and it's hard to serve them. So that is completely off topic, but it's something that I just like to remind people, like writing menus for quantity food service is just hard. So take that for whatever it's worth to you.
All right, we are at our hour. So thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. Thank you so much, Caitlin.